Dennis Krader, Dennis Krader.
Okay. And I'm going to have you again answer me in complete sentences. So, how old were you during the flood?
I was 22 years old when the '64 flood hit.
Okay. Is that picking up any of the other sound?
I heard a crinkling. Could you hear there was some crinkling going on in the stream?
That was me.
Oh, okay.
Did you pick that up?
Sorry. Just want to make sure because I'm hearing it, but I don't have headphones on. So you were 22 and the '64 flood hit. And where were you living when the '64 flood hit?
Right here at 1725 Thelma Street in Fortuna.
What were your experiences during the flood?
Oh, it was scary. All that water coming down the river with everything imaginable in it and on it.
Were you, where did you work at the time?
I worked at Fernbridge Cold Storage down on Depot Avenue in Fernbridge behind the railroad depot.
That was really close to the Eel River.
About 100 foot to the edge of the bank.
And what did you see when you were down there working at the cold storage?
When the flood hit, we were standing in water up to our waist, pushing logs around the south side of the building with pike poles from the log ponds, and was pushing logs, units of lumber, anything that come along that would possibly knock the building off its foundation. Was trying to push it around so that it wouldn't take a direct hit. And there was all kinds of animals, wild animals, bears, mountain lions, coons, possums. I even seen a couple rattlesnakes on top of trees that was coming down.
So when it came down, it was like a tangle of the brush and debris?
Yeah, sometimes. Sometimes it'd be just like an individual log coming along.
It sounds really dangerous to be standing waist deep water doing this. Was there a current where you were standing?
Oh, yeah. But the building we was in had a big ammonia plant in the back of it, and it was sitting on a cement pyramid that was probably 10 to 12 foot wide at the bottom, coming up through the floor about 4 foot above floor level, tapering down to about 4 foot by 4 foot at the top with a big 10-horse motor and compressor on the top of it. And I figured that would made a pretty good anchor on the back end of the building. And the front end of the building was setting on the street level. But it was probably, well, before the flood hit, we had a little over 8 foot of clearance under the building on the back. But after the flood went down, we had less than 4 foot of clearance under the building because of the sediment built up.
Were you on the bridge at all during the flood?
Yeah, went up on the bridge a couple times before it got quite that deep, and saw houses and barns coming down the river intact, and they would go underneath the curvatures of the bridge, and it would just literally rip the roofs right off of them, so you could go over on the other side of the bridge and look down in the buildings with no roof left on them. Very, very scary, because it just would shake the bridge when those big things would hit.
So what I was wondering is, what did it sound like?
Like a constant roar, and the water, just water everywhere. I mean, here in the valley, I could look off the bank here where I live, and it was from the base of the hill clear over to the base of the hill at Ferndale. Just solid water from one side of the valley to the other.
And a lot of cattle were killed during the
Lots of cattle, yes.
Imagine a couple days later, things started to not smell so good.
Well, they tried to get them as fast as they could, and I understood that they hauled most of them over to Centerville Beach and dug big giant trenches in the beach sand and buried them.
And your house here kind of became a refuge for people. So
Yeah,
what happened there?
we had, my parents lost their home out at Metropolitan. It went down the river in the flood, and then my friends Byron and Veda Oles lived in a trailer just down off the bottom of the hill here at Drake Hill Road, and their trailer went down the river, and so we had my parents and them living with us for a number of months after the flood because they had no place to live.
How big was your house?
It's 904 square foot. One very small bedroom and then a average sized bedroom. So we had wall-to-wall people sleeping on couches, sleeping bags, and wherever they could find a place to lay down.
And this was pretty close to Christmas, so how did it affect your Christmas?
I don't know. We did what we could do.
And you had a pretty young family at the time.
Yeah, I had my oldest son was just born in August prior to the flood. And we just bought this house and moved into it the 1st of December.
Okay. And let's see. So how did it affect your work? I mean, because the place that you worked sounded like it was underwater.
Yeah, the freezer room was the most difficult because being the compressors were setting so high that run all the refrigeration, the freezer room stayed pretty much frozen until it got up high enough to get the water got into the motors in the back room. And so we had to shut the power down at that time. But then as soon as the water receded, we took the motor out, and Fortuna Motor Works here rewound the motor and put it back in and got it up and running in probably 14 to 16 hours after it had been shut down. So everything in the freezer room stayed frozen, that as far as what was in the lockers and stuff that was stacked up in boxes and stuff. But when we opened the freezer door, it had sealed enough that just water went in, so we only had maybe a 1/4 inch of sediment in the freezer room. But everything in the 2 bottom tiers of lockers, the meat and stuff that people had stored there, was frozen into solid cubes. And so I worked for 18 to 24 months after that, going in whenever I had a spare time with a hammer and chisel and crowbar, cleaning out all those lockers and then getting the stuff out of them, and then taking buckets of hot water and soap and cleaning them, getting them ready to use again.
Do you know anybody whose home had some of that silt come in and how they cleaned that out?
Well, like there at the locker plant, the way we got it out of there, we wound up, well, we had right at, I think it was 43 inches of water inside the plant, but we wound up with 18 inches of mud when it went down. And luckily, some friends of the owners, Henry and Edith Vacinas, knew people from the Fortuna Fire Department, and they brought fire trucks down and literally started at the back door hosing it out. And just a little bit of time working it out and hosing it out with those great big fire hoses.
I imagine if it was your home, you couldn't probably do that.
No, I don't really know how my brother lived down off East Benbow Drive, and he had the mud outside the yards was right up to the edges of the windowsills all the way around his house, and he had just about as much mud inside. But I don't really remember how he got his out of there or how he even got the mud away from the house. I know it took some big tractors to clear off all that mud out of the yard.
So your parents, whose house was destroyed during the flood, what did they do after the flood?
Well, they lived here until they could secure a mobile home, and then they moved it in over at Royal Crest Mobile Estates and lived there until Mom got too confined in a little single wide mobile, and then they wound up buying a house over on Kenmore Road.
And your friends, what did they do, the ones who were staying?
They bought another mobile and moved it down. They lived on Veda's parents' property in their front yard, and so they bought another mobile home and moved it in there and got back in after a few months.
Seems like a mobile would be the way to go because you might be able to get it out.
Yeah. But after the '64 flood, they put the big levee in, and it's stopped the water from coming into Fortuna so far.
What do you think about that? What do you think the future holds for floods in Humboldt County?
What was that now?
What do you think that the future holds for floods in Humboldt County? What do you think if we hit another one like that?
They said that was a 100-year flood, so hopefully not for another 100 years.
Definitely. And how about other friends? Did you have any other friends who were really badly affected by the flood?
Oh, other classmates and whatnot. Like down on in Metropolitan, just about all the homes on the lower Metropolitan Loop Road went down the river.
Could you explain where that is? A lot of people don't know where Metropolitan.
It's south of Fortuna, 5 miles. If you see Chapman's Rock Shop just after you go over the Van Dusen Bridge, the Metropolitan Loop Road takes off right there and then comes back on down at the other end by the Bellevue Bridge, close to where Eel River Sawmills used to be. Just looped through the valley, and it was pretty much lined with houses all along there. And they all, by the most part, went down the river.
What caused so much timber and stuff to come down the river? I'd heard that there were some, like some of the timber that had been piled up at the mill.
Oh yeah, all the mills up, because back then there was mills all the way up and down Highway 101, clear to Garberville. Just about every little town had a mill, and most of them were close to the river, and all their coal decks and stacked lumber and everything went down the river.
Were people able to identify some of that and retrieve it, or was it pretty well lost?
It was, a lot of it was, like the logs and stuff all have little metal stickers on them, and they could identify them by the stickers, but the lumber, I don't really know how they could identify it, other than I think PL at that time was the only one cutting old growth redwood, so they could identify their lumber where the other ones were cutting Douglas fir.
I've seen pictures where they were burning some of the lumber that had gone out into the ocean and like all along the shores. Do you remember seeing any of that?
No, I don't.
Let's see. What was your family doing for a living during that time?
My family, my mom and dad lived out on the Renner Ranch just south of the Van Dusen Bridge, and Dad was a dairyman and Mom was a homemaker.
How did that affect his living with the dairy industry?
Well, he continued to work out there for a number of years afterwards. Had to commute from Royal Crest because he had the home right there on the ranch to live in prior to that.
And were they able to kind of, because so many dairy cattle were killed during the flood, were people able to rebuild their herds?
Well, on that where they lived, they had high ground, so all their cattle survived. It was the ones down on Lolita Bottoms and Ferndale Bottoms that lost the biggest percentage of the cattle around here, because there was no place to move them to.
I was thinking that with milking them too, like, during the flood when you're not able to milk your cattle, I mean, it seems like that is another difficult thing for the animals.
Well, out there at the Renners, of course, all the power was knocked out for a number of days, but they did have a motor for running the milking machines and whatnot that they could hook up to the tractor. And they had milked the cows, but there was no roads to get the milk to the thing, so they milked the cows and it just run down the drain. Because you quit milking the cows, they all dry up.
You guys have any other questions?
There's a story of houses going down the river.
Yeah, and I think he told that story.
Oh, there it is.
So tuned into the sound and the video
sound.
and everything.
Sorry.
But so the houses that went down the river, how many houses did you see, and what did that look like?
Oh gosh, I seen dozens of homes and barns, and what was kind of scary was sometimes propane tanks would be coming down where they had been ripped off from their homes, and they're like a jet-propelled boat going down the river with this big stream coming out of them and just scooting along. Kind of like, it reminds me of seeing a torpedo in a war picture.
I've heard people talk about that there was a crane that was moving logs from one side of the bridge to the other. Did you see that?
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Could you describe that?
Well, it was just a big, like a scoop shovel thing that would go down, and they was breaking up the debris that was piling up on the bridge, and luckily they got enough off of it that it didn't push the bridge away. The only damage Fernbridge got was on the east ramp going up to the bridge. It's built like a cement box, and one log punched the upriver side of it and punched a hole in it and drained a bunch of the gravel out. But that was the only damage that bridge sustained during the flood.
I've heard people talking about dynamiting some of these chunks of logs. Did you see any of that?
No.
Yeah. Seems dangerous.
And when I was working in the plant pushing logs around, there was only one log that we wasn't able to stop, and it was probably 10 foot wide at the base with the root ball still on it, which was much bigger, and it was broke off coming at us like a spear, and where it was broke off it was a jagged end maybe 3 foot across. And when two of us stuck our aluminum pike poles in it to try to stop it, and we'd usually just held them against our stomach to try to stop it, but it just kept coming, so we backed off and put the pike poles against the back wall of the hallway we were in, and it just bowed them both up into horseshoes and punched a hole right through the upper side of the building, and then it finally slowed up enough that the root ball turned and floated on around the building. But that was the only damage that we took from stuff coming down the river. And then finally the sheriff's department come in and told us we all had to evacuate. It was too dangerous in there, and apparently the biggest percentage of the flotation had got down the river by then, because we come back in later and there was no more damage to it. But it was a pretty scary experience. Hope I never see it again.
Jennifer, can I
Sure.
cross-examine?
Do you think maybe if you switch places so you can keep
Yeah.
the eye line?
Sure. Dennis, I was going to ask you. Oh, sorry, Jennifer. I was going to ask you when that you were there. It must have been on Tuesday evening till it got dark, as you were still pushing those.
Yeah, it was dark when they made us leave, because they was afraid the building would get knocked off the foundation and there'd be no way out.
You
But
guys would have been in it.
yeah, we had to get out of there. We had a rope tied to one of the meat rails coming out of the front of the door, out the front door, and it went from there. And at that time, Nielsen Company had a big grain bunker on the south end of the depot that they filled their grain trucks with. We had the rope running from the locker plant over to it, and then from there across the railroad track to a telephone pole up by the highway. And to leave the building, we went hand over the rope, because there was water and even logs floating down the railroad track.
Well, because I had read that Dwight Odell was talking about how in the middle of the night on Tuesday going into Wednesday, the water had gotten so deep in front of the store there at Fernbridge that they couldn't even go out to check the gauge anymore.
No, because
So when you were talking about going over there, watching houses come by, and
that was before it had reached its peak even.
so that was early in the afternoon,
Yeah.
Tuesday or Tuesday morning.
Yeah, we could walk down Depot Avenue there there was no water in it yet.
And Depot Avenue is that little street in front of Barnes.
Yeah, between the depot and Barnes Tractor and the locker plant.
And on that side of the railroad.
Yeah.
Yeah. So then once the police or the sheriff's department asked you to leave, you just came out and came on home then? You didn't hang out over by the bridge as a
Yeah, no, we come home because I was tired. We'd been there for many hours.
And wet too, if you were
Yeah.
up to your waist.
Hmm.
Yeah. So a lot of people had come down earlier then to try to retrieve their meat?
Pretty much when it got to the point where we knew it was going to come in the building, I don't think people really even tried to come and get it.
They had other
Yeah.
works at that point.
Because they said, well, it wasn't going to be much deeper than the 55 flood. Well, in the 55 flood, it hadn't went in the building at all. But then when they realized it was going to come way more, then it was too late. Like, we had quarters of meat that was hanging in the cooler that, had we known it was going to get that deep, we could have put it in a truck and brought it up here to Fortuna Lockers or up to Campton Heights Market or something and hung them, but we didn't realize it, and the quarters were half submerged in the water.
Yeah. Let me ask you a little bit about your parents' house down in Metropolitan. Can you give us a sense of how that all happened? Your mom was in the house, right, at the time?
Yeah.
Your dad was working the dairy.
Uh-huh.
So as the water came up, they didn't leave right away?
Well, in the 55 flood, the water had come up just under the floorboards of the house, and they said, well, maybe 2 foot deeper, they were estimating. But they were thinking, 2 feet at Fernbridge. Well, by the time you get up to Metropolitan there, the canyon's a lot narrower, so 2 feet equated into a little over 8 foot deeper. And the house, to get down to it, had a steep driveway going down into it. Well, once the water got up to the point that they couldn't get the car around it, there was no way of getting anything out of the house when they realized it was going to come up that deep. And so they just grabbed what they could and went out the front door and crawled up the bank. And Dad had parked the car up on the road. And so they just had what they could carry out with them, and everything else was lost.
Right, and then they went on to Fortuna to evacuate, or where?
Well, once they could get out of Metropolitan, they come here and stayed with us.
Here.
Yeah.
Okay, so then, because the bridge didn't go out at
No.
Van Dusen.
No, but the road, just after you drop off the Van Dusen Bridge and go around, when that was flooded, it had about 6 or 8 foot of water on the highway down there.
Yeah, I saw a photo the other day with 6 feet of water underneath that 12th Street overpass, underneath there.
Mm-hmm.
So it did fill up. Okay, so they weren't in really, their lives were never in danger.
No,
because they
no.
were able to get out of there.
They was able to get out.
Yeah, okay. And then the house did come off its foundation?
Well, the house that they were living in '64 was 2 cabins that they had for former employees, just little tiny narrow cabins that had been put together, and then they had built a solid perimeter foundation addition to it and put it all together and put it all under one roof. Well, when the flood come along, the parts of the house that were just on post and pier, they just up and took off, and the part of the house that was on solid foundation, it was bolted down, so it stayed, but it was just the living room, the bathroom, and 1 bedroom.
Well,
Just, could you ask that question again about the gauges and have him answer that? Because, like, I remember you talking about that earlier about the gauges.
about the depth of the water, we're talking about the approach to the Fernbridge. You go up there.
Uh-huh.
By the time you left, it was already dark then when you left?
Yes, it was.
Okay, so it was getting into the night.
But I would have guessed the water at the approach to that bridge would have probably been close to 3 foot deep at that time.
That's all. I thought it might have been up chest high even.
No.
By the middle of the night, it must have been.
Yeah, it probably got up that high, at least in the middle of the night.
Right.
'Cause they were,
Do you know where that gauge is?
the gauge is off the side of the bridge on the north side of the bridge, and
Over on the Ferndale side.
Yeah.
Of the bridge. And it's
well, no, it's on
After.
it's on the Fernbridge side, but it's on the Creamery side of the bridge, not the Barnes Tractor side.
Go over, it's on the right.
Yeah,
Yeah. So it's a little protected from the river then.
yeah,
Yeah. I saw the gauge down at Scotia recently, and it's kind of protected around a corner
Mhm.
there. But it looks like it'd been hit a couple of those I-beams, and it's I-beams.
Yeah.
It looks like some of them are bent over. So you figure that when you left, there was probably about 4 or 5 feet, 4 feet of water, maybe.
it was right up to my waist when we left, because I was wearing chest high waders, and so I wasn't getting wet standing in there. But
What time do you think that was?
I don't really know. You lose track of time when you're
In the middle of,
doing stuff like that,
in
and
the middle of an emergency like that.
Yeah.
what to do. I'm just curious because it seemed like in the middle of the night is when the crest actually
Yeah.
came. And it got up to 29.5 feet.
I believe that's what it was. Yeah.
That's what the paper said. Okay,
So actually, I just wanted to go back to where that gauges. Did you say that the gauges, you were able to read the gauges on the Fernbridge?
I wasn't able to, no, but I imagine people know how to could.
yeah, it wasn't his
Could go
job
down.
to do it.
Well, I thought that Michael, I thought you had said that the gauges were washed out there.
No, what I said was that the people who were supposed to be looking at the gauges and reading them throughout the night, it got to a
Oh,
point
okay.
where the approach to the bridge got so deep with water, and it was rushing. I mean, it was a just a roaring river.
Yeah, because you come down off
Go
that.
out there to look at the gauges.
Yeah, because you come down off that approach and you go over the railroad tracks. Well, there was logs 3 or 4 foot across floating down a railroad track,
Yeah.
along with fallen trees and everything else.
So that must have covered that road up there in front of the grocery store. There,
No, well, because it comes up pretty
pretty quick there.
there. So I don't think it ever actually got up on the highway, on the old highway there,
Okay.
but it completely covered the lower road there when you drop down before you go up onto the bridge approach itself.
Yeah. And the what you call Depot Avenue
Yeah.
that goes over across in front of Barnes.
Mhm.
And
Any other questions?
yeah, I think we got a lot.
Yeah.
Yeah, thanks,
Well, if I
Dennis.
could just ask one quick one about communication, and did you all know how widespread this was hitting California and outside?
No, because I was out down there working at the plant thinking, well, they said it was a couple foot deeper than it was in 55. Well, I wasn't too worried about my folks' house because I know Dad would have went in and put everything up on the kitchen tables and the dining room tables and lifted everything up. But then I was just totally shocked when I finally was able to, I forget how I found out through one of the sheriff's department or something, that my folks' house, most of it was gone. Because naturally, had I known if they was in trouble, I'd have been down there helping them. But
Well, it must have been difficult to not be able to do much when that happened.
yes, it was.
Yeah, I think 55, I think in Farmers they were counting it as 18 feet deep at 55 flood. And it got up to 29 and a half feet at 64.
No, I think it was like 25. Wasn't it 25 feet during the 55 feet, and then 29 something?
Yeah, maybe that's right. Yeah, maybe that's right. I'm thinking earlier in the day.
Yeah,
I've been reading these charts as the day progressed on Tuesday into the night.
yeah.
They kept getting deeper and deeper, and it was.
Were you involved at all in the relief efforts? You know, trying to help families that have been affected by the flood?
Just the ones I had living here.
That's helping a lot, and that's how a lot of people survive.
I mean, you do what you can do, you know, in a situation like that.
Do you think the community kind of came out to kind of support each other during that?
Oh yeah, yeah.
In what ways did you see that happen?
Well, just people helping people, taking refugees in. To this day, I still help the Salvation Army every year with donations because they were there and give my folks a lot of stuff after the flood. You know, as far as clothing and some furniture and whatnot, and didn't expect anything back. I was disappointed in the Red Cross because they come out and give my folks stuff, and then a few months later they got a bill for it in the mail.
It's harsh.
Yeah,
And it was used stuff.
Which to this day I'll never give the Red Cross a dime, but the Salvation Army I donate to them every year just because of the way they help my folks.
oh